All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're waiting for a few more to join. And we'll get started in just a few minutes here. Okay, everyone, we're going to wait just a couple more minutes, let some other folks join. All right, it's 1:35, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. Thanks, everyone, for joining. This is one of our tech talks on cloud migration and lessons learned. My name is Andrew Tennant. I'm the practice director for hybrid IT and cloud here at GTRI. And we appreciate you taking some time this afternoon to join us and listen in and ask some questions at the end if you have some. You can also put them in the Q&A panel if you'd like. We'll answer those along the way. Today we wanted to focus really our attentions on what we have seen and learned from our experience helping many of our customers not only embrace the cloud, but migrate applications to the cloud, and really what the gotchas are, what the benefits are, really the open conversation around all the above. So with that, let's jump right in. It's worth kind of taking a moment to spend time on the motivation for going to cloud. If there wasn't some of this in the background, I think it would just be a bunch of extra work for everyone. So let's talk about the challenge that we're hoping to address with things like cloud and why cloud is picking up so much momentum. Right? No secret to anyone on the phone here. We have resources that are being given to IT departments are flat or down year over year generally in most verticals in most markets. The complexity of the IT landscape is growing exponentially. Expectations of the business and what they expect from technology is increasing every day, led by the commercialization of things like mobile devices and mobile apps. Risk is going up as well. And it's really the gap, that increasing gap that's causing consternation amongst your peers and requiring us to do things differently and look at new ways to accommodate workloads in our environment. And really, one way I like to look at this is around the notion of maintenance and innovation. If we look at the amount of resource, and by that I mean time, money, people, that can be dedicated to innovating on behalf of your organization versus sort of keeping the lights on, traditional organizations are roughly 80% maintain and leaving only about 20% to innovate. And that's a real struggle because you're spending so much time in the weeds kind of catching up on tactical things that you don't have time to sit back and work on innovative leading architectures for the business. And this is not restricted to any, like I say, any one industry or vertical. This is pretty ubiquitous. And it's one of those bitter ironies that we can't spend the time to fix things because we're so busy dealing with the chaos that is our everyday. So one of the benefits, though, that we see with something like cloud computing and cloud architectures is potentially a way to deburden this 80% baseline over here that we see in maintain. If we can take some of the nonsense out of that and leverage things like cloud to actually remove burden from that bucket, that will and should free up some cycles on the innovation side. And looking at some numbers from IDC, just to quantify where things are, this is a recent study. It was commissioned by Cisco. A recent study showing 68% of organizations are using some form of cloud, but either internal or external, and that's a 61% increase from just a year ago. Okay, so and these numbers, these are the latest numbers that they have that they finished up the end of 2016. So at the end of 2017, we'll see if it continues in that trajectory. But what's important here is that it's absolutely on the rise, and it's not just playing around. It's folks who are using it. One thing we're going to talk about, though, is use of cloud comes in many forms, right? There's a maturity scale that IDC has developed. On the far left, you have kind of the ad hoc low maturity users. These are folks who are just beginning to leverage cloud. They're just digging into it. They're just beginning to sort of dip their toe in the water, and they probably have some specific need that's driving it, and it may in fact be shadow IT or some unauthorized work from let's say a line of business owner that's out there using cloud. And in mix of things, about a third of them are using public cloud and private cloud equally, 30% as well. So a mix of both, right? And we'll talk more about private cloud in a moment. Then we have opportunistic. Those are ones looking for short-term improvements and access to resources through the cloud, and those who are considering cloud for net new or isolating some environments. So that's kind of a very specific targeted approach. As we increase maturity, we get to repeatable. So this is now adopting agile access to those resources fundamentally through some standardization and implementation best practices, right? Really driving a more specific IT-driven model and governance around the use of cloud. Beyond that, we have managed and finally optimized, right? And at the end of this value chain and this maturity level is these optimized customers are the ones who are really not only making the most use of cloud, but are getting the greatest value. And I think that's critically important because depending on where you are in the scale, as you'll see in just a bit, the more mature your cloud adoption is, the greater value you will get out of it as an organization. And again, another piece to this is that cloud today in the modern reality is a hybrid proposition. So there's not only the use of public clouds like Amazon and Azure and others, but also the use of internal resources vis-a-vis a public cloud paradigm. So an operational model that is reminiscent of cloud, right? But done on, say, captive resources. Now, let's begin from if you will, a lessons learned perspective, cloud readiness and what that means. And if we break it down to the simple people, process, and technology buckets, I would say that the first two are probably the most important, right? We tend to focus as technologists on the technology side of things, but truthfully, the people side and process side is crucial. So from a people perspective, got to really understand what the motivations are for cloud for the organization. Is it perceived to lower cost? Is it just time to market? Is it agility? Is it not having to deal with, is it a shadow IT group that is not wanting to leverage traditional IT and maybe the processes that are in place there? So understanding from a people perspective what's driving that, what the motivations are, is extraordinarily important. It's also important to have alignment in terms of what the perception and benefit of cloud is. So getting everyone on the same page, including IT, line of business owner, developers, et cetera, on the same page is important. And really that drives the third piece, which is expectations. If one group has an expectation of agility and you deploy a cloud that doesn't offer that, the success of that may or may not meet the needs that you're hoping for, right, and the outcome that you're looking for. So that probably goes without saying that expectations are important to set up front, but I've seen more failed cloud initiatives based on these attributes than any technology decision, right? From a process perspective, I would say that anyone who views cloud as the panacea, and if you simply get stuff to the cloud, it will inherently be better. Realize that it's not a magic bullet, right? It's not something that's going to create good where there was bad. And quite simply, if you have poor application performance or poor process or poor data and you put it into the cloud, it's going to continue to be that way, just now in the cloud instead of being on premise. So generally speaking, doing it for the sake of doing it is going to yield very little benefit if you're not evaluating the nature of the workloads or the nature of the data, really, then your results are going to be foreshortened for sure. From a technology perspective, that's again the piece that we tend to focus on the most, but the truth is it's the easiest one to accommodate because the tools today are better than they've ever been. There's a tremendous amount of focus in this space and the number of tools that make this journey quite trivial from a technology perspective, as long as you've got all the other bits ferreted out up front. Next, I would say in terms of priority is that the organization understands your applications. And what I mean by that is understanding the dependencies for starters, right? You have to know for traditional applications, multi-tier applications, how are they interconnected? What relies on what? How are they, let's say there's a particular database as part of a stack. If you migrate that stack off to a cloud provider, let's say, but lo and behold, there's another application that was back-end using that same database, and now it's suffering from a latency problem, let's say, that's gonna leave a bad mark and a bad taste in everyone's mouth relative to cloud. So it's crucial to, before you do anything, be able to map out your applications, map out those dependencies, understand which ones make sense as far as candidates for cloud and which ones don't. We'll talk about some ways to approach that here in a moment. In that as well is understanding the architecture. There are architectures that don't lend themselves terribly well to cloud. And what I mean by that is if, for example, you're going to cloud for elasticity and maybe just having to not worry about the infrastructure, but your application can't take advantage of elasticity in any way, it's a monolithic application, then moving it to cloud for the sake of moving it may or may not be the right move. So understanding the architecture and what benefits you can impart to that stack is important. And in some cases, that means a consideration of refactoring that application. Instead of moving it lift and shift, maybe it's an incremental approach where you look to disaggregate the components and rewrite portions or all of that application before moving it to a cloud native or cloud appropriate architecture. And when I say cloud native or cloud appropriate, that's really leveraging the elasticity and statelessness that many cloud providers offer. So things like having a web tier that can scale based on real-time demand, unscheduled, unexpected, unanticipated. I want my web tier to notice that my inbound connections are increasing and go ahead and add additional web front-end processes to take that load, for example. That's not something that happens necessarily just by, automatically with an application stack. So having applications that can take advantage of that is certainly going to increase the value of going to the cloud. As I said before, it's not the panacea. I don't just get everything for free when I move stuff to the cloud. So remember that you still have to do things like monitor that application. And what is your strategy for monitoring an application, especially if it's able to do things like scale itself and auto-scale the various tiers and so forth? What does it mean for that application to be operating or functioning? What does it mean for that application to be struggling? So you need to make sure that you have thought about the operational implementation of tools and so forth to meter those things. Likewise, performance, same really set of underlying concerns there. How are you measuring and monitoring performance when this application now is living beyond your traditional data center if you're deploying it in a public cloud, let's say? And obviously, security is paramount. This is living in an environment that's not wholly under your control. It should not be, security should not be viewed as an inhibitor to going to the cloud. The models today are advanced and mature enough that should really very infrequently be a barrier. In fact, some organizations hold it up as kind of just a reason not to do things in the cloud. The truth is today you can do quite a bit in the cloud, and there are some very large, very security conscientious government agencies that do a tremendous amount in public cloud. So it can be done. Don't let security itself be if you will, a built-in excuse not to entertain some of these things. And back to the mention I had a moment ago about deciding which applications make the most sense to go to the cloud. This is a model put forth by Neil Nicolaisen, really around a purpose-based approach and a purpose-based alignment of applications. So if we look at our applications across the board and we kind of map them to these 4 quadrants, we have criticality along the x-axis and differentiation along the y. We have things up here in the upper right that are both highly differentiable and highly critical to the business, these kind of core applications. I would certainly not suggest anyone lead with these as a move to the cloud or a potential migration to the cloud. These are the ones that have the biggest potential negative downside should you falter or something go wrong. So maybe leave these to the end. We'll come back to that. Things that are highly differentiable but not yet mission critical. So these, I want you to think about things that let's say are experimental, right? Where you're iterating quickly. It's development, high iterative DevOps type work. Those are a no-brainer to go to the cloud, and that's why we see quite a bit of that activity going to the cloud. It also marries well with the resource benefit of having those at-will resources in a cloud paradigm, so we can scale them up, use them, and then extinguish them and return back to normal. On the lower right, we have applications that are highly critical but not necessarily differentiable. So in other words, these are things that are going to certainly we'll know if we lose email access. It's absolutely essential, but it's not making us more competitive. Being excellent at Exchange is not is of little value, right? It's a parity play. These actually become candidates to target a SaaS type offering, I would suggest. So look in this parity quadrant for targets for just enlisting a SaaS provider and completely getting rid of that application from that 80% of your stack. And then finally, inevitably, we all have that technical debt. Those applications that have been around a long time, they might provide some very basic function that we believe is necessary, but they do it in a way that is not cost effective. It's on legacy equipment that's extremely expensive, something of that sort. We typically want to consider those as things that we reduce and or exit completely. One way to do that, by the way, is to take that business function and iterate on it back here with maybe a refactoring to a new application. So take the function out, rewrite it in a new novel way, and deploy it that way. And as we look at this model, right, we can see there ends up being a life cycle. Things that are experimental at some point become core, right? And then over time, those core functions become parity, and parity become legacy technical debt. So this life cycle is a great way to not only point in time snapshot your environment, but also track it going forward. Another lesson learned is to avoid cloud lock at all costs. Hopefully everyone joining the conversation today has heard stories about folks who have gone into a public cloud and now they can't, quite honestly, they simply can't get out easily. Either there's a cost prohibition, there's an API restriction, there's something that they have now become reliant upon or dependent upon, and getting back out is very difficult, right? We call it the Hotel California syndrome. You can check in, but you can't check out. And really, it comes from a few things, not least of which is that these public cloud providers are not motivated to make it easy to leave, right? Not surprisingly, their business model is one of trying to be comprehensive and provide value, but they want to make it kind of difficult to turn around and go back out the same door you came in. So in almost all cases, their policies, procedures, even their pricing model is going to be biased toward keeping you there and making sure that that relationship stays. Some of those are preventable, though. So, for example, if you embrace public cloud and let your developers just go hog wild with native APIs to something like Amazon, that's probably going to bite you in the long run, because it's those exotic APIs and those exotic services, more importantly, that become very sticky, right? So if you stick to basic sort of compute and storage, no problem. But as you get into the higher order functions and features of something like Amazon, that's going to make it harder to get back out and change direction if you need to. And realize that the reason to change may be something you don't even see today. It could be a business relationship, it could be a cost, it could be a change of ownership, it could be any number of things. So be very wary when someone says, yeah, well, we've decided on Amazon, so we're okay just letting people go hog wild in there because that's our choice. Well, I've seen those choices change over and over and over. Companies who were dead set on cloud A and end up at cloud B. So the way to avoid that is leveraging some sort of tooling, some sort of cloud management platform or cloud brokerage between your users and the workloads and those public clouds, right? So we want to keep one step removed from that cloud, so if we ever do need to pull back, we can. And there are lots of tools out there today, like Cisco Cloud Center, the former Clicker product, would be an example that we believe in quite strongly here at GTRI. That's going to let you focus on the application and deploy it, whether it's internally or on a public cloud, and it takes care of all the sort of specifics at the cloud level. We'll talk about that a little more in a moment. Again, I mentioned costs can be something that you need to think about, but think about it in both directions. We tend to look at the cost model getting into the cloud. That's really when you should also look at the cost model of coming out of that same cloud. Storage, for example, with Amazon, it's one cost to go in and it's another cost to come out. And if you're doing the math up front to sort of see what the business case looks like, you really want to make sure you have all of it in mind. As we drill down a little bit more on some of these cloud lock kind of cautions, if you will, on the left-hand side, give you an example would be somebody taking an API or script-based approach to applications. Let's say it's WordPress. If I take WordPress and I try to take it to Amazon, it's going to be specific scripting and so forth to get it out to Amazon, which would be different than on, let's say, an OpenStack internal private cloud or even over at Azure. So just having that variation of cloud options results in having three totally separate operating paradigms. It's very infrastructure-centric. It's very cloud-specific relative to the workloads and the scripts involved. And it's going to imply a very tight relationship with services that are required to pull it off and impact on people. If instead you take an application profile-based approach, really then the focus is, here's my application, and I'm going to put it through some magical process that takes the application, and then depending on where its target is, it's going to change the nature of the underpinnings to place it onto that appropriate cloud, again, internally or externally. Could be your own VMware cloud, your own OpenStack, or some public cloud. It's going to do all of the translation for you. That single step can prevent a majority of the cloud lock that you would otherwise suffer with. And again, an example here would be something like Cisco Cloud Center. So let's talk about cost a little bit more. Depending on who you speak with, I've heard failed deployments or troubled deployments or false starts in cloud where somebody comes back and says, we went down that path, but we didn't save any money, right? It didn't save us anything. I would contend that cloud is not shouldn't be thought of primarily as a way to save money, right? Lower cost is really the primary outcome. And if you go into it advertising that or expecting that, you're often going to find disappointment there. It doesn't mean it's not of value, but it may not result in simply a lower cost. Hugely important. It may be just time to market, speed, and agility. We know those are benefits of cloud, but emphasize those and let cost be a wash, and then you'll end up probably being okay. And if you're looking at this, run the numbers, but don't manipulate them. Like be true to what the numbers tell you, because it will come out in the end if you're trying to sort of favor it one way or the other. If you go into it with an expectation of being cheaper or more expensive, you'll probably end up coming up with a calculation that sort of backs up your point. Whatever that cost structure is at any given point in time, though, it's going to change. So even if it makes sense today, putting application X on cloud Y, 6 months from now that might no longer make sense, because the nature of the application itself relative to that cloud, that cost model might change, or that cloud provider might change their cost model. So this is an ongoing kind of real-time effort, and again, it comes back to tooling. Make sure that you have tools that are constantly aware of these changing cost structures and are actually application specific in that regard. So I can take an application and say, you know what, based on this application, what's the best place to put it today? And a tool like Cisco Cloud Center will take that application, actually deploy it on the clouds that you choose, and actually give you a cost structure from each. So it's not just sort of predicting that, it's actually going to model it in a real-time run. Take the application, run it, figure out the results, and come back and tell you. So it's going to tell you cost performance-wise where the best place to put it is at any given time. That's a terrific thing to have. And again, if you're choosing a tool, look for that kind of capability in that tool that you choose, in that cloud management platform you choose. One thing that is fundamentally different is almost universal is a move from CapEx to OpEx with cloud, right? So in some organizations, that's part of the reason for doing it, just simply to get to a more of a run rate OpEx model. Depending on your vertical, it may actually be a burden. Some folks, some customers of mine actually realize that cloud's not the way to go because they are a very CapEx heavy industry, let's say. So think about that. And the reality is at GTRI we can provide financial engineering around virtually anything. We can turn CapEx, traditional CapEx expenditures into an OpEx model. We can even turn OpEx into a one-time capital-looking expense. There's lots of things that we can do as an engineering effort on the financial side, so keep that in mind. And again, as I mentioned, cost can vary by application cloud combination. So App A, Cloud B might make sense, but that same application on Cloud C might be prohibitively expensive based on the nature of the storage needs or the compute cost. It's going to be very specific, so the message and the lesson learned there is have a plan and a process in which you can evaluate these things on an ongoing basis. As I said at the start, in that cloud maturity model, the greater the maturity level of an organization, the more they fully embrace it, not just sort of let it happen in the corner, the greater the benefits are going to be. And indeed, this I think really tells it all. Over on the right-hand side, we have that traditional cost savings bucket. So here's a case where, lo and behold, they did save some costs. They reduced costs, broken out by some business process improvements, some IT operations benefit, some savings on infrastructure, risk mitigation, and maybe even some open source software benefits. But on the left, I think, is really what cloud is all about. Right, the benefit on the positive side, on additional revenues, new routes to market, a new customer touch and customer value, faster time to market, enablement of new initiatives, as well as risk mitigation on that side of things, risk of being sort of put out to pasture because you're not innovating as an organization. So really, so cost is great on the savings side, but it's about raising the top line that I think gets most people excited. So with that, we have roughly, let's see if I've got the time right, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I thought I would open it up for Q&A, and let me see if I can pull this off here. In fact, maybe if Ryan is in, he can open up the audio. If not, and if none of you are on audio, you can also just add a question in the Q&A panel if you'd like. There's a chat panel and a Q&A panel. I'm watching both. So if you've got a question, feel free to send it up that way. I see a few familiar names out there. Mr. Carl, how are you, sir? I know you've got a good question. I'm not seeing anything come in yet on the question side, so I'll give it a few more minutes. But I do want to thank everyone for taking some time this afternoon to at least explore lessons learned around cloud migrations and things to look out for and things to be thinking about. Hopefully it was valuable. While we're waiting for Q&A, I'll give you a couple things if you want to go a little further. Certainly we'd love to talk to you about coming in and facilitating a cloud workshop if you'd like. So reach out to your GTRI account executive, or you can reach out to me directly if you'd like. Also, the Cisco Business Cloud Advisor is a terrific tool. It's actually a tool that was developed in partnership with IDC, but it's a great tool to walk you through some of the same considerations that we touched on here. And it's got a library of some almost 8,000 other customer peers of yours out there who have already gone through that evaluator to kind of see where you are on the maturity scale and so forth. I think it's a terrific tool. You can go in there quietly and run through it, and it's not going to rat you out to anyone. So I think it's a great thought leadership tool for anyone to access. So, all right. Well, I will hang on the line here. If anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I really appreciate everyone taking some time with us today. You're a quiet crowd. I was thinking I'd get some really tough questions. I'm glad I didn't. And I'm going to put my email address in the down here in the chat window to everyone, but it's attenant@gtri.com. Also on that first slide, I'll bring that back up. So if you have any questions, please, oops, I guess I don't have it on there. But it's in the chat, so you have it in the chat window for you. Feel free to reach out and have a great rest of your day. We'll give you about 10 minutes back, 7 minutes back, I guess. Thanks so much.